everybody, and welcome to part 2 of a series that I am doing on a lecture on the history of Western Hermetic Esotericism and the Qabalah. This is part 2, and in this lecture we are going to be focusing on the Qabalah. Now, I did this lecture in my Masonic Lodge, and overall both parts combined took me about 45 minutes to go through. The first part of the video series was over an hour, so this one will probably be close to that. So I'm able to spend some time and get into more depth than I was while doing the lecture in Lodge. So I hope that that's appreciated or wanted. If not, put me on a faster speed and you can get me through my speech a little bit faster. What I'm using this for as a kickoff video for a new workshop in Qabalah. So starting in the new year, I will be doing a Qabalah workshop based off of the various traditions that I know and kind of synthesizing it into my own interpretation. And this will be the kickoff of that. So for those of you interested, this is basically video 0. Now, what you should have, if you're interested in this workshop, is in front of you right now a notebook dedicated to the study and something to write with. And this is going to be a fairly lengthy journey. Learning the Qabalah is not easy. Now, if this is your first time here, if you don't know who I am, let me do a quick introduction. My name is the Desert Viking on YouTube, and I have been involved in esotericism for over 30 years. I backed into Freemasonry later in life, much later in life. And so I had already been involved in initiatory orders, again, over 30 years before I even was brought into the Freemasonic fraternity. Qabalah has been something I've studied most of my life, off and on. There have been periods in my life where I was more dedicated to other things like music and raising a family and job and so forth. But I was heavy into it when I was younger, and then sporadically through my early to late adulthood. And as I got into middle age, I got more involved in spirituality and re-immersed myself back into it. So I am the current sitting prior of our Knights Templar Collegia as of this video, and this is something that we eventually get into as well as the Qabalah. So if those things are interesting to you, we're going to discuss some of that. As far as Freemasonry is concerned, I'm a member of my Blue Lodge. I'm a member of the York Rite. I'm a Masonic Knights Templar, 32nd degree Scottish Rite, which means very little at this point to me because I just received that, and there's a lot of information that I have yet to synthesize through. So while that title has been granted to me, it's like a Master Mason. I don't feel like I've earned either of those things. That requires a lot more busting rocks in the quarry, so to speak. But I'm involved in a lot of all those individual things and some other Masonic orders that are not on the public radar, meaning they're invitational bodies that mainly deal with scholastic and academic research. So that's enough about me, but that's kind of where I come from. As we ended our slide in the last video with the 3 pillars of Hermetic Western Esotericism, so to it we shall begin again. So again, remember, just as a minor recap, there's a few things to remind yourself with. Number 1, what we're talking about here is not Freemasonry. I did give this lecture in a Freemasonic lodge. That does not mean that this is Freemasonry. It is not. There are certainly symbols that tie in the two things, so they have a shared heritage, but they're not the same things at all. That's important to note. Number 2, going back to slide 0 on the last slide, some of this stuff is steeped in legend, and academic scholars will very strongly disagree with me and call me out for being a pseudoscience and being wildly inaccurate or wrong or whatever, because scholars do not agree with those things. So as a reminder, number one, I am not a genius guru who knows everything. I'm still learning. Number two, oral traditions were not written down. I am an engineer by trade, which means I studied the sciences through college, and in my whole life I've studied mathematics and I've studied applied sciences. So I appreciate science. I appreciate modern science and what we're trying to achieve with it. Modern science says if there's a written proof or there's evidence, then it happened. Otherwise, it didn't happen, and that's its flaw to me. That's its flaw, because it wasn't very long ago that people were laughed at for thinking the Earth revolved, for saying the Earth revolved around the sun. People laughed at you, and you could actually be killed for that, for heresy. Or that little demons infested your body and made you sick. That was pseudoscience garbage of the utmost absurdity. And yet, then later we find out that bacteria and viruses are a thing. There's a lot that scholars guess on. They guess on these things, and then because they're scholars, people give that guess credence, and they say, well, that must be the truth. They don't consider it that it's a guess or a theory. They treat that as the truth. When it comes to esotericism, number one, you can't always readily prove it, which is why it's a separate thing from the sciences. Spirituality and the sciences used to be knitted together, and then during the Renaissance and the Enlightenment era, we split them apart, to our own detriment, I believe. Scholars will say a lot of different things that they have no proof on, but of course, absence of proof is not proof itself. So you have to keep an open mind and skepticism. Always keep an open mind and skepticism. But a couple things. They'll claim the age of civilization, but yet they'll also say that it's absurd to say that there's any evidence in the North African Sahara Desert that anything happened, because no evidence was found saying otherwise, yet very little, if any, of the Sahara Desert has been excavated for artifacts, because it's too hot and dangerous, and there's no profit to be had there. But they haven't delved there, but yet they say that there's nothing there. How those things don't match up, or they claim that civilizations or evidence does not exist for pre-civilizations, like structured advanced civilizations. When we say advanced, we don't mean like robots walking around, but advanced civilizations would be anything like us, or even 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. But we have explored very little of the undersea oceans to make that claim. It's an absurd claim. Now, they can say, we have not yet, as to date, found those things, but also acknowledge we haven't looked very many places for it either. But they don't do that. Göbekli Tepe is showing us that advanced civilizations existed far older than scientists and scholars would like to admit. That's not me bashing science, but what that is saying is that their theories are just theories, just like they have as much credence as legend, in my opinion. Maybe you can weigh them a little bit less or more, and that's fine, but I'm not playing with semantics here. But if you can't prove it either way, then you can't prove it either way. So I'm not going into this as straight fact when I talk about the history of Qabalah. It's a legend. Whether you choose to believe it or not is on you. But don't be swayed by scholars say, because the scholars, if something wasn't written down, or if there's no evidence of it, it never existed, yet an oral tradition never would have been written down, and therefore they'll date the beginning of something at the point when it was first written, even if it existed for thousands of years before that. All right, so keep that in mind. Skepticism is important, science is important, but also that the traditions themselves have been transmitted orally for a long time, and they don't always match what scholars know because they were never written down. The three pillars of Hermetic Western esotericism are the Qabalah, alchemy, and Gnosticism. To many traditions, those three things form the root and the base of what we're talking about today. And we're talking about Qabalah more specifically today, so that's one of the pillars. Gnosticism stems from Greek philosophy, I believe. Plato's Timaeus laid the groundwork for a lot of the Gnostic thought that would come a couple hundred years later. And it is from there that we get the idea that the kingdom of heaven lies within us. It is from here, this takes also ideas from Pythagoras and the quality of numbers. And it is from that our spiritual traditions derive from through various texts which were burned and removed out of history, of which we've begun to recover many of them, but not all of them. Gnosticism is its own branch of study, and you can find all kinds of things on Gnosticism. If that's something that interests you, which it should, if you're into Hermetic Western Esotericism, you should at least poke into Gnosticism. My suggestion is to first read the Secret Book of John, the Apocryphon of John. That's a great starter. It's a short one, and it lays the foundation for a lot of what you'll read later. And there's a lot of other books I can recommend to you. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Alchemy and Qabalah sit on opposite pillars. So like Gnosticism to me is that central pillar, the root, right? The middle pillar, the balance. And then Qabalah and alchemy sit on either side of it. And they both ultimately do the same thing. Alchemy, from alchemical studies, derive chemistry. And alchemy can be divided into spiritual alchemy and physical alchemy. And to many people, the fantastical things that alchemy could do could never happen, and science would definitely tell you that. So they focus more on spiritual alchemy, which is turning the lead of man into gold through a process. Now, I have seen some things with physical alchemy for me to believe that there is some truth to some of the legends, and I'll just leave it at that. Alchemical studies can take up your entire life as well. And in the Templar tradition, we do both Qabalah and alchemy. So the physical alchemy can be broken down into plant alchemy and mineral alchemy. And plant alchemy is typically where you start because plant alchemy is safer. Though if you ingest toxic plants, that can kill you. So you want to be careful with that. I did a thing on here a couple months ago. I did a lemon balm, which is one of the first alchemical tinctures you learn to make. And I can say that I had great success with it. Now, is that because it was alchemically done or just because I did a folk remedy and we know it works? Probably a little bit of both, right? And scientists would say, well, it's because it's a folk remedy and we know that that's a cure-all or a cure for the things that it touches, which for me was blood pressure and it helps you sleep and it lowers your anxiety. It is the plant of Jupiter. So that is its own field of study, and we're not going to get too deep into that today. But if you follow the channel, follow us in our Discord, you'll see there's a whole alchemy channel, and as we get deeper into it, we'll be sharing how things are made. Excuse me. So that takes us to Qabalah. Qabalah is a map. It's a map of where you are on the tree, and it shows you where you are. And is also a way to commune with the deity, with God. So let's look at the Qabalah. The first thing to note with the Qabalah is that you may find several different spellings of it. They all ultimately refer to the same thing. And Qabalah is treated as Jewish mysticism, and so if you see it with a K preceding it, that likely the author is dealing with the Jewish mysticism context. If you see a C in front of it, it often deals with the Christian mysticism context, which became a popular thing with the Martinist order. And a Q is the Hermetic context, and the Q is how I typically refer to it as. So just be aware that you may encounter various spellings of Qabalah, but they are referring to essentially the same thing. Now the timeline of the Qabalah. Okay, we're getting into, trust me bro, verbal legend here, okay? And I realize that, so I'm pointing that out now. The Qabalah, the most popular tradition in Western esotericism, is that it began with Moses on Mount Sinai. he allegedly received those writings from God, among other things, and was commanded that it should be an oral tradition only, and it was only for the priest caste, basically. There's an alternate legend that states that Adam was given access to the Qabalah by the archangel Raziel, who means the archangel of secrets, and upon Adam's expulsion from the garden, that Raziel taught him the Qabalah to help him commune with God, and that he was instructed to pass this down orally to his descendants. Now, my personal opinion is that the Moses story makes more sense. Scholastically, academically, the Qabalah did not exist before the first major source of writings for it, which was the Sefer Yetzirah. The Sefer Yetzirah shows up anywhere between the 3rd and 9th century, depending on who you're talking to, because they don't know. So as such, to scholars and academics, because the Sefer Yetzirah originates between the 3rd and 9th century, that's the origin of Qabalah. It could not have existed before that. And if you state otherwise, they'll let you know. In a loud, loud voice, they'll let you know. Because the oral tradition was not written down until then. Now, I cannot prove any of that. We've already been through that whole talk, and I'm not going to go through it again. But legend has it that Moses brought it down. There are some academics who have written books on how Qabalah actually existed before Christ through Greek texts, because there are a lot of Kabbalistic style writings. And so they liken those to Qabalah, which would kind of make sense if it was a verbal tradition that's been around for a while, that people who knew it would write that down, maybe not as Qabalah, but through influenced by the Qabalah. So we call that proto-forms of the Qabalah, Greek Qabalah. So to me, Qabalah, again, originated from Moses, and then, it became infused with Greek philosophy, and Christ himself likely studied something of the Qabalah, being that he was a rabbi. He was of the priest caste. So he was aware of what this was. The first example of the tree of life, as we understand it, can be found in a 2nd century text by Celsus, or maybe it was the 3rd century, 200, so it's probably 3rd century. This slide might be wrong here. Around that time, 2nd or 3rd century, by Celsus. Now, that is also hotly debated by scholars, and some will say that that's nonsense, that tree in that drawing had nothing to do with the Qabalah. I suggest you study it for yourself and draw your own conclusion. Now, I stated that the Sefer Yetzirah was the first text, and it was. In the Sefer Yetzirah is a very small text. It was written down anywhere between the 3rd and 9th century. Again, this is where scholars say, this is where Qabalah began, because this is the first writings we have, therefore this is where it began. It describes the tenets of the Qabalah, the Sephiroth, etc. It puts it into words. And it describes the tree of life as more of a cube of infinite dimensions, which Paul Foster Case in the 20th century took and ran with, which you can look at in Boda. Now, after Sefer Yetzirah, things in Western Europe get dark. As we know, the Dark Ages come down. Studying any type of mysticism outside of the church's approval, which was almost none, unless you were a member of the clergy, would result in death. So anything we would have during the Dark Ages is extremely limited, because anyone who would be stupid enough to write that stuff down would be condemned to death, or if it was found, it would be burned. So all of that stuff is lost to time. But around the 11th century, there was a Gnostic sect known as the Bogomils, who were the precursors to the Cathars. And the Bogomils and the Jews of southern France revived it. And from here, this is how Jewish mysticism will take it and synthesize it into its religious order. and why it becomes known as Jewish mysticism, even though there's evidence to say it it came. Well, if it came from Moses, I guess that is Hebrew inspired. So that's true, but it was also infused by Greek philosophy. In the 1200s, 2 other books were written. So there are 3 total foundational texts. The other 2 books are the Sefer Bahir. The Sefer Bahir, some Kabbalists will claim that this comes all the way from the 1st century, and this was oral tradition, and it was just written down in the 1200s. And then you have the Sefer Zohar, written in 1280. So those 3 texts, the Sefer Yetzirah, the Sefer Bahir, and the Sefer Zohar, form the trilogy of books that form the foundational principles of Qabalah. And if you wish to be a student of Qabalah, it behooves you to obtain copies of these books. Now, I recommend strongly that you get commented versions, at least at first. And as you get better at it, you can kind of dive into the text without someone holding your hand. But it's dense reading. And, yeah. There's a 4th book, and I personally don't know. In my opinion, it has nothing to do with the actual Kabbalistic tradition, but there was a book, or a grimoire, whatever you want to call it, called the Sefer Raziel, which was written in roughly the 1200s. And this book allegedly was given to Kabbalist students once they had mastered the 3 foundational books. And the Sefer Raziel, per its mythology, was written by the Archangel Raziel to further expound upon the mysteries. And likely it was written by a monk to help further expound upon the mysteries. But you can get that book as well. You can find that, and that's even more dense. But those books exist, and those are things you can check out. Now, from the workshop I want to do, we're not going to even be touching any of that stuff for quite a bit, but I want you to be aware they exist. Now, continuing down the timeline, we have the Tree of Life as we know it, which is on the right side of the screen here. This is what I call the Hermetic Tree of Life, or the Standard Tree of Life. That's what I call it, because this is the one that most people are familiar with. When you see images of the Tree of Life, it is likely going to take this form. This Tree of Life found its origins in a book called the Oedipus Egypticus. And this was a synthesized work in the 1600s by a guy named Kircher. And what his goal was, he was trying to synthesize all of the esoteric traditions into a single, work, which is a noble work and very flawed. It's one of the books I don't actually own because there's just a lot of in it that's wrong, so I don't even bother with it. But the Tree of Life that we would understand, as I understand it, I traced it here in that book. Now, there are other configurations of the tree that exist that have different paths, and this used to blow my mind. So the tree here is the tree that I first learned, and it's a tree that a lot of people first learn. And I had worked with this for many, many years, and then it was through, I don't even remember which work it was. I saw a different configuration called the Airy configuration, which is slightly different. The paths are slightly different, and I struggled with dogma at that point. I was like, how can this be? And I struggled with the fact there's multiple trees of life configurations. And in fact, there are many different configurations. It's most you'll never see or hear of. There are some texts, some academic texts you can get that have drawings of different versions of the tree of life. But I'll go into that knowing that there's more than one. And I think that's important, like as a Templar, to open your mind to not following a dogmatic approach, because even the Templar tradition of, or at least the collegiate Templar tradition of Qabalah is going to be different from what is commonly taught in some Hermetic schools, as I've been informed. Now, I have not gone through those degrees yet, so I do not know the difference. I've just been told as such that there's a difference, and that some of the guys from Boda and the Golden Dawn, they kind of get pinched on that because it's different from what they were taught, and they have a problem with that. But I want you to know that going into this. There are different configurations and traditions that teach slightly different things. And what I came up with through a meditation a few years ago was simply this, because I was struggling with that concept. If you go into a forest of oak trees, or any tree, pick a tree, your favorite tree, they're all oak trees or whatever the tree is that you want. But none of them are identical to each other. And such is how I approach the tree of life. We all have our own tree of life. And honestly, I think that's part of our work, is to come up with our own configuration that's personal to us through path working. Let's keep that in mind, please. And we may touch on other configurations. I have in other videos talked about them. Here I'm not going to deviate from the standard. And I put a little image down here of Paul Foster Case's Cube of Life, which this is what he teaches in Bodha. So Paul Foster Case was a genius, 20th century esoteric, but this is just one tradition. Another thing I'll point out with Freemasonry, again, Freemasonry and Qabalah themselves do not have direct ties. However, they do have indirect ties. One of the first things we're taught are the supports of a lodge, are the three pillars: wisdom, strength, and beauty. And here they are in front of you right here. Wisdom is this right pillar, that's Hokmah, and it's called wisdom. And these pillars have different names too, by the way, but you name them after the Sephiroth, you can. So wisdom is Hokmah, which is this Sephiroth right here. Strength is the leftmost pillar that you're looking at here. Strength is called strength because of Gebura. This is also the pillar of severity, but it could also be called the pillar of understanding, and so forth. And then beauty is the middle pillar, and it's called beauty because of Tifereth here in the center. Tifereth means beauty. And if you go through the three Masonic degrees and you pay attention to what's going on, you're going to see that that middle pillar, who runs the middle pillar, is very important, because that represents us. And that is showing us, in this case, the middle pillar has to keep these two extremes in check. It is the balance between those two. And that's one of the basic lessons of Qabalah. So if you have a notebook, write that down. Your very first foundational principle of Qabalah, the three pillars, middle pillars where you want to be. It's very difficult to sit, and you want to keep those two extreme pillars in check, because we are both of those pillars. We have both of those pillars within us, and we want to walk that gray path in the middle. Okay, so now we have another concept called the tree of death. So I found this image here, and I kind of expounded on it. The tree of life and death. So the tree of life, which is what we just saw an image of in the tree of death, provide a map of the divine structure of the universe and the soul, offering a path towards spiritual enlightenment and a deeper understanding of existence. And if you look here, you will see this serpent slithering up the tree. Now, some people are afraid of the serpent. The serpent has been given a bad rap as being a creature of evil, which is absurd. In fact, in the Bible, Christ talks about serpents, being wise as serpents. In Gematria, which is a form of Qabalah, the word serpent and savior have the same numeric value, meaning that there's a relationship between the serpent and the savior. In the Apocryphon of John, which is the secret teachings of John in Gnosticism, it's the first book I recommended to you, you will find that Christ is represented by the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Now, this is where dogmatic religious people go off the rails and confirm that what we're doing here is obviously evil, which is, again, absurd. If you look at a caduceus, that's a staff, the rod with the two snakes winding their way up. That's the medical symbol, right? You see it on ambulances. It's also the staff carried by Hermes Trismegistus. That caduceus is two serpents going up the rod, unifying at the top. There is a lesson to be learned there. There's many lessons to be learned by the caduceus, but the one that I like is it's the two extremes winding together up the one middle pillar. Now the path of the serpent. The path of the serpent is a winding path up the Sephiroth. So if you'll see it, it basically touches all of the Sephiroth as it climbs from Malkuth, which is the bottom, all the way to Keter, which is the top. And it is that path of the serpent that we follow to reunify our spirit with God. The Tree of Life and Death shows where we stand currently in our journey. There's ways you can understand where your current iteration sits. It is the key to understanding divinity, and for our brains, it consists of 10 Sephiroth as dictated by the Sefer Yetzirah, which represent different attributes of the divine, and we will touch on those in this lecture. In addition to the 10 Sephiroth, there are 22 paths that connect them. So on the Tree of Life, if we look at the Tree of Life, we see there are 22 paths connecting these. Okay. And there's one hidden path known as Da'at, which stands for knowledge. So if you add those together, there are 32 paths, plus the hidden is 33. Now the Tree of Death, underneath, is the underside of the Tree of Life, and reflects all of those things that are the opposite of divinity. This is where they call this the Qlipoth, or the demonic shells. And we have to understand those equally as much as we understand the divine to get that middle balance right here. And that's what this represents here. So the man, the Vitruvian man, he has to balance not only between the right and the left pillars, but between the Tree of Life and the Tree of Death. Which if you look at an equilateral cross, which I'm wearing here on my shirt, that represents that as well. It's one of the representations of an equilateral cross. That point in the middle, which is obtaining balance between the two extreme ends and as above, so below in the middle. That's one of the things. This also represents the horizontal beam represents materialism and the vertical beam represents spirituality, and this represents the conjoining of those two things because we are both. So it's similar. So you will hear about the Tree of Death much later in our journeys, but be aware that it exists. As above, so below. Moving forward, I have an image here of Jacob's ladder. In Freemasonry, this is an image that we are also familiar with. Jacob's ladder can mean several things. In Qabalah, Jacob's ladder is the construction of the four worlds of the Qabalah's trees of life to form a ladder. Meaning you're not just walking up one tree of life, there are several. And we have to climb that ladder to get to the divine. We're trying to reach the divine. Now, some traditions teach each Sephiroth is one of the rungs. So you're climbing one of the rungs. So that would give you, there are four worlds of the Qabalah, as shown here on the slide. It would give you 40 rungs to climb. Some other traditions will claim that in between those major rungs there are 12 minor rungs, representing the 12 signs of the zodiac, which would give you 120 rungs per world. So it's a long climb. It's not something that we just accomplish right away. And some traditions say that it's like 2 or 3 lifetimes, and to me it's a lot more than 2 or 3 lifetimes, but that's just my own personal opinion. Now the four worlds of the Qabalah are represented here. And in Hermetic tradition, we break down the unspeakable name of God, the Tetragrammaton, Yod-He, Vod-He, that's how I pronounce it. We assign each of these to a world. Now, important to note, Hebrews read from right to left. We go fire, water, air, earth. I think a lot of this came down to the structures in terms of what world was which element. I think that was synthesized by the Golden Dawn because it fit better, because what they wanted to do was water and earth fit the feminine, and Hech is the feminine letter, and Yod and Vav are the masculine, so they wanted to intersperse those between those two things. So fire, water, air, earth is also, as I understand it, the order of the Scottish Rite red degrees. And I'm going to say that, meaning the first 3 degrees. I'm saying this not having gone through those. I read about the alchemical significances and how in the red degrees, air was the entered apprentice, whereas in the blue degrees, water is the entered apprentice. And that's because in the red degrees, if I'm guessing, and I could be wrong on this, so I'm sure someone will leave a comment and tell me how wrong I am. But I'm assuming that came from this synthesization, which is interesting because if that's true, the red degrees predate the Scottish Rite, which the red degrees predate the Golden Dawn, which indicates that association did not come from the Golden Dawn, that the Golden Dawn took that association from the Scottish Rite, which, considering the Golden Dawn stems from Masonic SRIA and Scottish Rite degrees, no, it would make sense. The traditional elemental order is laid down by Pythagoras as fire, air, water, and earth. That's an aside, has nothing to do with anything, really, other than for you to take note, because you're going to see those elements flip-flopped in your studies, and that's a point of contention you may run into where you're like, what? So take a note of that in your notebook. For our purposes, most Hermetic traditions consider this fire, water, air, earth. So this is at Zulith. This is where the divine dwells, this world. You have Bria, which is where the archangels dwell. This is the world of creation. This is what I call the standard world, because this is the world where the colors you'll see on the Tree of Life stem from this world. You have Yetzirah, which is the world of formation. This is where the angelic choirs live, and they actually do the work. And then you have Asiya, which is the physical realm. It's the lowest realm of the universe, according to Qabalah. That's Jacob's ladder. We're trying to climb that. That's the whole point of this. We are climbing the ladder to get back to the divine. That takes us to the Sephiroth. Now, I've already talked about the 3 names of the pillars. One of the things that many Kabbalistic authors will talk about is that they treat the Sephiroth as filing cabinets where you place your scenarios, emotions, and meditative topics to dwell upon and to think about. So, for example, if I'm an angry person and I have to deal with anger, I have a lot of anger, that emotion could be held within 2 actual Sephiroth, to be honest. Right here, if you can see my mouse pointer, this is Netzach, which is a Sephiroth that deals with emotions. It's ruled by Venus. It's our emotional state, amongst other things. Another place anger might dwell is Qabalah, which is severity, which is aggression. It's a Martian, Mars, or Aries, right? So in that case, if I'm dealing with anger, I could pick one of those 2 Sephiroth, and I could meditate on it. And by meditating on it, I can meditate on the number. Qabalah's 5, Netzach's 7, what those numbers mean, what symbolizes those numbers. There's archangels that are assigned, which we'll look at. You can pray to those archangels if that's something that you feel comfortable with doing, if that's part of your spiritual journey. That's part of working with the Qabalah. And through that meditation, understand your anger, understand where it comes from, and understand how to harness it for something useful and ultimately ground it. Now we're going to take a journey briefly into the 10 Sephiroth and what they're associated with. Now, one thing you'll notice, there was a tradition that started. There's tarot cards here. And it was, I believe, Eliphas Levi that started this in the mid-1800s. And it was picked up on by a lot of esoterics later on, like Pappas. And they pushed that forward. So this is ingrained in a lot of traditions today, the tarot association with Qabalah. There are 22 paths of the Qabalah, There are 22 major arcana of the Qabalah. There are 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So they saw those as being, there's something there, guys, and they applied the 22 major arcana to each of the paths and the Hebrew letters. It's not consistent. It's not consistent at all. And in fact, when you look at different arrays of the Tree of Life, you'll see different Hebrew letters associated with those. Additionally, on those 22 major arcana cards, we know that there are 10 Sephiroth and there are 4 worlds. And thus the 40 minor arcana come from there. So the 40 minor arcana are the pentacles, which represent Earth, which represent Asiya. Then we have daggers are traditionally, but Gerald Gardner kind of threw that into a tizzy. But the knife used to represent the element of air. So I believe in modern times here we either call those staves or wands. So that's the element of air, which is Yetzirah, second world. The third world was water, which is chalices or cups. The fourth world, the third world was Bria. The fourth world is Atzulith, and that is the sword. So if I'm talking about, so I can apply those minor arcana to the 10 Sephiroth of a certain world, which means, let's say I pull the 5 of swords. Well, that means Gebura in the world of Atzulith, and its meaning represents that. So when you look at the meanings of the cards and you meditate on them, it's a tool for helping you unlock the symbolism on the card to help you understand that Sephiroth. And we could talk about tarot. I could cover videos on tarot as well. Tarot as a divination tool, when I say divination, I mean fortune-telling tool, was not a thing until the early 1800s or thereabouts. Up until then, from the 1200s on up, it was a means of reflection and meditation via symbology on the mysteries. Or so I was taught. But we do know that as a fortune-telling device, it didn't start until several hundred years after it was introduced, so keep that in mind. Keter is the top of a specific tree of life, and it means crown. Its color in the standard color, which is Bria, the world of Bria, is white. Its divine name is Ehecheh, meaning I am. Forgive my butchering of the Hebrew language. Its archangel is Metatron Cathariel. Metatron Cathariel used to be known as Enoch. He is one of 2 archangels that weren't created as archangels. They were humans at one time. Its angelic choir are the Kaoth HaKodesh, the holy living creatures, and its representation in the heavens is the beginning of all revolutions. And the beginning of all heavens, Rashith HaGilgalim, is the planets. So what planetary body is this associated with? Important to note that the tradition I follow uses the 7 classical planets, which means there's 10 Sephiroth and you have 7 planets, so you obviously have 3 that don't have a planet associated with it. There are some traditions that have applied Uranus, Neptune, Pluto to the worlds as well. So that's a difference to point out. And here we have the aces representing Keter. And the deck I try to pull from is the older Rider-Waite deck. I believe that's what those are. Moving down, we go to number 2, which is over here to the right. This is what's called the lightning flash of creation. So when we go down in order, 1, 2, 3, etc., this is the flash of lightning that emanates from the divine and crystallizes into the material. Chokmah is the top of the pillar of wisdom. It's also known as the pillar of mercy. In Hebrew, Chokmah stands for wisdom. Its color is gray. Its divine name is Yah, meaning the Lord. Its archangel is Raziel, the archangels of secrets. Its choir are the Ophonim, the wheels, the many-eyed. And in the 10 heavens, it is represented by the entirety of the firmament, meaning the entire zodiac sphere. Bina, to its left, the top of the pillar of strength. Bina stands for understanding and insight. This is represented as The Mother Superior, as Dion Fortune liked to say. The stern nun who will wrap your knuckles when you disobey. She is represented by the color black. The divine name here is Yad-Heh-Vad-Heh Elohim, which is the Lord God. Its archangel is Raziel Zafkiel, the Eye of God, and is represented by a feminine archangel. Something to note with archangels is many archangels do not have a gender. They can be either male or female to you, because their true forms are something that the human mind can't understand. But typically, Raziel Zafkiel is represented as feminine. In fact, the pillar of strength is a feminine pillar. The angelic choir here are the Irlim, which are the thrones, and in the 10 heavens, this is represented by Kronos or Saturn. Now we're going to shoot across, this empty space here is known as the abyss. We're going to shoot across the abyss and hit Chesed, which is also sometimes called Gedula. Gedula is number 4. In Hebrew, Chesed means mercy, and Gedula means greatness. Its color is blue. The name of God here is El, meaning God. The archangel, Zadkiel, the righteousness of God. The angelic choir is Shashmalim, the shining ones, and in the 10 heavens, this is represented by Jupiter. Shooting across the path, there are 3 horizontal paths, if you notice. This is Gebura. Gebura represents strength or severity, and this is where the pillar of strength gets its name from. Its color is red. Its divine name is Elohim Gibor, meaning the God of battles. Its archangel is Kamael, the severity of God. Its angelic choir are the seraphim, the flaming ones. And in the 10 heavens, it is represented by Mars. It is also represented by Aries in the zodiac. Moving on down, we get to the middle chamber, Tifereth. This means beauty in Hebrew and is why the pillar is called beauty. Its color is yellow, like the sun, which is its planetary representation. The divine name of God here is Yad-Heh-Vad-Heh Eloah Vida'at, the Lord God of knowledge. Its archangel is Raphael, the healer of God. And its angelic choir is the Melachim, the kings, or the messengers. This is also known as the Christos, the Christ center. And it is here you must master. There's a veil between here and you notice this long path to Keter. This is Da'at in the middle. This is hidden. This long path to Keter crosses what's called the abyss, and the entrance of which is guarded by a veil, which you must learn to tear, and is guarded by angels with flaming swords that will not let you pass until you are ready. And if you try to pass this before you are ready, it is said very bad things can happen to you. So it's a very long achievement to get to the point where you can rend the veil and transcribe or translate between those two worlds. Moving down, we get to number 7, which is Netzach, which means victory or endurance. Its color is green. Its divine name is Yad-Heh-Vad-Heh Zabaoth, the Lord of hosts. Its archangel is Hanael, Netzachael, glory or the grace of God, and is also seen often as female. Its angelic choir is the Elohim, the gods, the principles, and intuition. And the 10 heavens here, it is represented by Venus, Venusian qualities. Opposing that is Hod. Hod represents rational mind, so rational mind compared to emotion. See how those two things are opposite of each other? If you have too much emotions, you don't think. And if you think too much, you lose your emotional breadth and what makes you a human. So that's, again, where that middle pillar comes into play. Now, Hod represents glory and majesty. Its color is orange, and its divine god name is Elohim Zabaoth, which is the God of hosts. Its archangel is Mikael, Hodiel, the perfect of God, who is like God. This is Michael, the archangel Michael. Its angelic choir is the Beni Elohim, the sons of God, which drive us to seek knowledge. And in the 10 heavens, it is aptly Mercury, or Hermes. Yesod, we're coming to number 9. This is the foundation of the tree. Its color is purple. In Hebrew, it means foundation, and its divine name is Shaddai El Kai, the Almighty Living God. Its archangel is Gabriel, the strong one of God. Its angelic choir are the cherubim, the strong ones, and in the 10 heavens is represented by the moon and the astral sea. That particular Sephiroth represents the astral realm. It's a tricky place because it is a realm of, they call it the House of Illusions, the realm of mirrors. And as its ruling planet is Luna, or the moon itself is one of the great illuminaries in the sky, but itself sheds, it has no ability to actually create light. It reflects light. And as it reflects light, it is akin to a mirror which reflects. And it is through that mirror that we see illusions. So you can get caught in that central point of the pillar by staring too dreamily into what could be. And last, we have Malkuth, which stands for kingdom. That's at the bottom. Its color is actually 4 colors in an X pattern: citrine, russet, or rust, olive, and black. Its divine name is Adonai Haaretz, the Lord of the earth. Its archangel is Sandalphon, one of the 2 archangels who were once human. In this case, he was once Ezekiel, as it is said. The angelic choir are the Ashim, the souls of fire. And in the 10 heavens, its sphere of the elements is earth. Now, I use this in some of my writings when I'm comparing the Qabalah to Freemasonry. This lower tree right here, so we start in Malkuth as profane or normal people. And as we're initiated, we are initiated into this lower triangle, which is called the astral triangle. And the 3 degrees of Masonry are these 3 Sephiroth in my interpretation, how I've related them, where we have to master our emotions, we have to sharpen our mind, and then we have to be able to elevate ourselves beyond illusion and not fear death, the illusion of death, which is the 3rd degree here, before we can rise up to the next triangle. I've always considered Freemasonry to be the first 3 degrees, to be the porch of the mysteries. If you're interested in that, well, I'm working on a series of the 4 elements and how they relate to the 3 degrees of Masonry as well as to the Seeker. I'm happy to share the Seeker document with anyone. The other ones are for Freemasons. It's directly related to them. So those are the Sephiroth. So we're coming up here to the end. We're going to wrap up here with the types of Qabalah. We have theoretical Qabalah, which is the intellectual and philosophical studies of its context and structures. We do a lot of that. We have meditative Qabalah. This is where you're going to try to elevate your consciousness by pathworking. Now, let it be said, pathworking is where I've found most of my enlightenment to have come from, because this comes from meditation. So this ties into the practice of meditation. So you have to get good at meditating. You have gematria or gematria, depending on how you want to pronounce it. This is where the Hebrew letters are assigned numbers, and then words or phrases with the same numeric values are evaluated as having similarities or hidden meanings. Now, it's not just Hebrew. We have a system of gematria for Greek, for Latin, for Coptic. And I will say that one of the things that used to drive me crazy with gematria was I would try to practice. And so I learned Golden Dawn gematria first. Golden Dawn gematria, all 22 letters have a number associated with them. And then the final forms of the letters have a different number associated. And there are 5 final forms in Hebrew. The 5 of the letters have a final form, meaning if they are at the end of a word, they're drawn differently. And they had different numbers. That is not the standard way of gematria. So every time I would be reading books with gematria, my numbers, my calculations would never match up with the book, and it used to drive me nuts. And that's when I found that there were like 9 systems of gematria that exist. So you have to know what the author, if the author's trying to use gematria to encode things in his text, you have to know what system he was using as well. Which typically is going to be standard, and typically the standard method is the final form of the letter and the normal form of the letter share the same numeric value regardless. The Golden Dawn version's a different version, and the final form of the letter has a different numeric value than the letter. And then there are a bunch in between, which you can go on a rabbit hole and discuss if you wish, or research on your own, because you may find those. I have encountered 3 in my life out of the 8 or 9 that exist. You have notericon, which is the principle of creating new words from the initial of other words. So an example of that in the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. To the north, you will invoke the name of God. The name of God you invoke is Agla, which is not a word. Agla is notericon. The A, G, L, and A represent different words, longer words, and they just took the first letter of each. And then you have tumura, which is the forms of ciphers that can be used. So you can use Qabalah to cipher words and encrypt them. And the @bash cipher is a simple one that you can look up on your own. And I do recommend, my friends, that you do investigate the different ciphers that exist and understand how to work with them. Because when dealing with some, if you're going to get into scholastic research and you're going to deal with some of these writings, some of them are going to be keyed to these ciphers. So it behooves you to know them. And last, we have the practical Qabalah, which utilizes the Qabalah for ritual work, incantations, and divine names to influence the various worlds. We also call that theurgy, the Jewish mysticism that is prohibited to all but the higher echelon of the clergy. From what little I know, I was Catholic at one point, and I did see Qabalah in a Catholic church in a library, and I was told never to touch that book. They may do some of that stuff, but otherwise this is for the theurgists. And if that's something that interests you, I will just say, get a good understanding of Qabalah before you even worry about that, or else you might be putting your hand on a hot stove. To wrap this up, Qabalah is one of the 3 great pillars of Western Hermetic esotericism. It offers us a detailed metaphysical map of the cosmos, the soul, and the divine. The tree of life and the Sephiroth and the interplay between divine light and material reality provide the symbolic framework that synthesizes cosmology, theurgy, and inner transformation. So it was adapted by Christian mystics and later Hermetic orders. Qabalah becomes a universal language of esoteric thought which bridges Hebrew mysticism with alchemy, astrology, and ceremonial theurgy. And last, its influences lies in its ability to unite the spiritual ascent with cosmic structure, offering a path of gnosis and reintegration with the divine. Remember from video 1, the point of Hermetic esotericism is the reunification of ourselves with the divine. So the Qabalah is a pillar of that. That is how it does it, right? That is the practice that you use for it. And Qabalah is not something you just dabble with casually and expect any results. It is a lifetime of study, and even then you're not even getting everywhere you need to be because it takes many lifetimes. The last thing I'll throw out there is there are different traditions of this stuff, and not every tradition agrees with the other. I mentioned Pappas and Eliphas Levi putting the tarot association with the Qabalah, and people take it for granted that that's just a fact, that's the way it is. Before they synthesized it, that had nothing to do with Qabalah, and in fact, not every esoteric of that era or today agrees with that. So, for example, A.E. Waite, right, he was the one that created the Rider-Waite tarot cards. He said that was absurdity, that was a bunch of garbage. So everything we do here will always have dissenting voices from within the esoteric community and from scholarly academics outside of it saying it's a bunch of hoo-ha garbage. It is a path that you have to dedicate yourself to, and also take through your studies, understand the opposing viewpoints, read them, see if there's anything worth taking out of them, because there probably is. Don't just take everything you hear as a fact or a truth. And again, to reiterate, I am not a guru. I am not the master of all things Qabalah or Hermetic esotericism. I've been on my journey through my life, and I like to relay that experience. But even today, I get people. I had just the other day one of the heads of Scottish Rite, like one of the big heads of Scottish Rite in Washington, remark on something of mine saying this was absolute fantastical nonsense. So, because scholars didn't agree, it's going to be part of your path. That's just the way it is. And that's important to know. Just be ready for it. All right. So that, my friends, that was about an hour. So I took about 2 hours total on that lecture that I gave. It was 45 minutes in Lodge. I want to go ahead and begin with this workshop. This workshop is going to be synthesized from what I know from Golden Dawn. It's going to contain a little bit of what I've learned in Boda. It's going to contain a little bit of what I've learned from a guy named Jean Dubois. It is my version. It's what I work with. It's not the only one. Again, the Templars have their own version, which I'm excited to learn as well. But I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. But it's up to you ultimately to synthesize your own version from all this as well. It's not me. I'm not going to give it to you and you're just going to be a master of the world. You have to synthesize this on your own through meditations and whatnot. And there's some tools I can give you that have helped me. And we'll discuss those. So I'm excited to get into that workshop, probably starting with the new year. That'll be one of my projects that I do. Because a lot of people ask, where do I start? What do I do? And I can hand you a bunch of books, but I honestly, a lot of the books I have, they're all saying the same things, and it's a review of what I just gave you here in this slide. A lot more in depth, yes, but it's still, that's what they teach you. The meat and potatoes, the path working and the meditation and whatnot, they don't really go into very much. So I want to explore that. I hope you liked it. I hope this was worth the watch. Thank you for taking the time. If you liked it, give me a like and a subscribe because it helps the algorithm show this. Otherwise, that's all I got for you today. I hope as we're moving into the winter months that you stay warm. I'm looking forward to this journey with you. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.